Well, members of the Papatoetoe Cricket Club, I'm actually here at McLean Park just prior to kick-off between Manawatu, who are challenging Hawke's Bay for the Ranfurly Shield. But I heard a little bird told me that you guys are having a big luncheon, so I just thought I'd wish you all the best. Troopy, I know anything that you put your hands to will be an absolute success, and you'll raise plenty of money. And I understand you've got our old teammate John Wright as your guest speaker. Well, you can't help bad luck, I guess, but he'll do his best, righty, as he always tended to do. And just make sure that the stories that he tells are half-truths this time round. All the best for a great day.
Please make yourselves comfortable because I talk as slowly as I used to bat. And namaste to all my Indian friends that are here.
Love you, John.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you all, and it's amazing to come back here after playing for the club and understand that there are many Indians playing here. I can assure you I had nothing to do with that. But as Anil Kumble said, when you're in India, if we play well, John, they'll name a street after you. And when you play badly, they'll chase you down the same street. So I haven't done any public speaking for a while. So for those of you who leave the dinner early, and there may be a few, hopefully not during the speech, and you see me running down through Hunter's Corner, chased by Indians, you know I've been bloody crap this afternoon. I'm delighted to be back here. I played club cricket for Papatoetoe in the early 90s. I saw Bill McCormick, he helped jack it up. Bob Coons was our coach, and he played for Papatoetoe. And Gary Troop, I ran into when I was 17. I was playing for Canterbury in the under-20 Raven tournament, and we were playing the Great Orcs, as we used to call them down in Canterbury. And Troopy was playing for Auckland, and he swore at me for about the 5 hours that I had to bat against him, right through the whole day. I remember that very well because the guy who was selecting the New Zealand under-20 team at that stage was a guy called Dick Motts, and he said to me, you know, if you can get some runs today, I might be able to get you in the team. And then I gave him all the money. Anyway, at the end of the day, Troopy and I have become good friends and have remained so ever since. But I'm really amazed to be back, actually, because the honest truth is that I was bloody useless for Papatoetoe. I hate to think what my average was here. I remember the wind, I remember the up and down nature of the wicket, and I was just thinking at the buffet today when we were having that lovely spread. Please thank you very much to the caterers. I thought it was a lovely meal. This is the first time I've had greens at Papatoetoe. I mean, lunch here was always a packet of chips, and if we were really hungry, we went to Kentucky Fried. But I was terrible. I mean, even the formidable motivational qualities of Wally Stamp. Where is Wally? Failed to ignite the spark in my batting. I did get 100. It was on the artificial over in the corner there, and Kerry Walmsley was bowling. I don't know who, I can't remember who Kerry played for, and I kept hooking into the short boundary, and it wasn't. In fact, that was going to be my big season for Papatoetoe, but unfortunately a bomb went off in Sri Lanka because New Zealand were touring Sri Lanka. And I remember Ross Dykes, the selector, rang me up and said, look, Righty, I was concentrating, it was about in the early 90s, and I was only going to play another year or so. I think we were playing the Aussies in 93, so it must have been late 92. He said, would you go if they came home? And I thought, well, will they go? I mean, they'll either all come home or they'll all stay, but they didn't. And so after my great 100 for Papatoetoe here, I ended up in Sri Lanka. And it was quite a transition even from an Auckland winter to a Sri Lankan sort of test match. We had a couple of warm-up games, 50 over affairs, and I managed a 3 and an 8 or something below 10. And I'll never ever forget the first test match against Sri Lanka, opening the batting. And it was so hot. Around the world, we were talking about where you can play in really challenging climatic conditions. There's Chennai in India, which is either hot, hotter or hottest, and Colombo. And I was out there scratching away, trying to just hang in there, and this fast bowler was running in at me with a sweater on. And I couldn't believe my teeth were sweating. So I had the perfect preparation at Papatoetoe. No, I actually did find club cricket extremely difficult to play. I've had a few clubs. I played, first of all, I had to leave Canterbury because I grew in the Canterbury team, so I came north and I played in northern districts. And the club I ended up was in Papatoetoe. I couldn't even afford to live in Papatoetoe now, with the house prices up north. And certainly I've been most impressed as a South Islander by the online auction. I don't think we have them down there. I thought, God, I can't bid on this. I've got to concentrate on what the hell I've got to say. But I played club cricket, and the reason that I loved playing here, and at the clubs that I played with, is that I grew up in the country, down in Canterbury, and played for Curwood. I used to open that batting with my old man. I was 14, and he was a better player than I was, to be honest. And I played country cricket. Then I went to Poverty Bay and played for Gisborne Boys High, coached them, and then I came up and I played for Metro. And that was the team in Papatoetoe. And I always found, I mean, Metro was a sort of team where, you know, we took it seriously, but if it looked like rain, the Cossie clock was a very good option. And there were times when we drew the batting order out of the hat. And we had Jack Snell, who was Peter's brother. He fielded it silly but on for the entire match. He just used to walk across. Kelvin, the local brookie, was the wicket keeper. We had the most imaginative fine leg setting. He was directly behind Kel. There wasn't a lot of confidence in his abilities. And I'll never forget one match. And Papatoetoe was the same. We played cricket because we loved it and we enjoyed it. And we couldn't be a big star either because we sat on your ass, and particularly if you did it before. And that was the thing that was most difficult because every time we walked out the bat out here, everyone was trying to get you out. I mean, normally when I play test matches, most bowlers want to keep me in. I played with, I remember one, well this is an example, I played with a guy, you won't know the name of Bill Massey. Bill was a farmer. He played for Metro. He used to bat about 7 or 8. And he used to arrive at the game in his Holden with his whites on, and all he had to do was get out of the Holden, put the handbrake on, and do his boots up. He was the sort of guy that when we went for a warm-up, our first warm-up match, he took his fishing rod, his girlfriend, and he forgot his boots. Anyway, I'm batting with Bill, and we need about 50, and we've got four wickets in hand. And I'm out there pottering away, and we get out there, and Bill says, okay, what do we know? I said, well, let's see if we'll get them in singles Friday. We'll get them in singles. So Bill takes guard, and next, in the scorebook, the numbers were 6.4.6, swing and miss. And I'll never forget him coming down to me, and I said to Bill, what about those singles? And he looked at me and he said, right, he said, it's all right for you. He said, but I'm not going to be here for very long. And that's the thing that I really loved about club cricket. I enjoyed it. So I don't think I'll ever make the Papatoetoe best 11. but it's pleasing to see my photo on the wall. It's very unusual because I don't know when you got that picture with me with a tie on. In fact, someone, I look a little bit out of place with a tie on and Papatoetoe. But anyway, it's lovely to be back. I've been fortunate. I've sort of been able to make a living out of playing cricket or coaching cricket over the years. I started, I was just like a lot of journeymen. I went overseas in '76. I wasn't quite sure what to do with my life. I've done a biochemistry degree. I've no idea why I did a biochemistry degree in Otago University. I can't bake a cake. But I left for England in '76. I had to leave my girlfriend and sell my stereo. And at the time, they were in both bloody good condition. Actually, I've always wondered what happened with the stereo. Actually, I went there in '76 to play a bit of cricket. I ended up at Kent, and I played second level cricket. We used to go to training with Bob Woolmer of all people. And it was Triumph here from Tunbridge Wells down to Canterbury and Kent. I played for the second team cricket. And I wrote to Derbyshire because they were the only club that didn't have two overseas professionals. They had one. And they wrote me a letter back saying, we're only interested in world-class players. Glenn Turner was playing there, Jeff Howard was playing there at the time, but that was the only two. And I'd only played for 5 first-class games. So I thought, well, bugger it, I'll be back to the farm or something else. And anyway, I was lucky enough that when Kent played Derbyshire, they recommended me to at least get a trial. So I got up and had a trial, and you know, as life turns out, it's one of those things. It goes well, and those were the breaks, and you know, ended up getting a few runs. And they gave me a contract, and you know, I stayed there for 12 years, and I loved Derbyshire. I'm president this year, of all things. Well, that's what sort of club Derbyshire is. I can't even bloody get there. I'm talking to members by Zoom on Monday night. And I loved it because of the characters. And I think that cricket is a wonderful game because of characters. Yeah, I think cricket's all about characters, and boy, at Derbyshire we had a lot of them. Our captain was Eddie Barlow, and we had a really, in '76, it was before his time, we had a huge sort of physical, it wasn't uncommon for us to be physically ill with Eddie, who was a South African, doing our fitness training. In fact, we couldn't play cricket, but by Christ we were fit. And I'll never forget lying in a bunker with David Steele, who used to learn to a dance and whatnot, and he said to me, "Bridie, you know what really pissed me off?" And I said, "What was that, Steele?" He was in his late 30s and I was in my early 20s. He said, "I had a heart attack before the season started." We used to joke that if anyone could hit the ball 4 miles, we'd be the first team to sort of fetch it. And then we had a groundsman called Walter. And Walter was a lovely fellow, but I remember booking out, and it was a bit like, it was the colour of the wicket out there, except there wasn't a cut bit. And I said to Walter, I said, "Christ, Walter, I mean, I'm an opening batsman." I said, "This wicket's a bit green." And he looked at me and he said, "Grass is always bloody green." And this is true. This happened. It's not Smithy, wherever he is. That's absolutely true. Walter, yeah, he was a character. Flat cap, jacket, a lot. And on my first away trip, I got my first-class century. It was against Hampshire. It was in Bournemouth. And they had Andy Roberts in the attack. It was a bloody flat wicket. And I got 100, and I was very thrilled about it, etc., etc. And after about 4 or 5 pints, I was starting to play exceptionally well, probably better than Bradman. And our scorer was an old cricketer by the name of Dennis Smith. And as I was waxing lyrical, he looked at me and he said, "Aye lad," he said, "you did play well." He said, "but if you die tonight, we'll manage." It's absolutely true, and I've never ever forgotten it. Because I always believe as a player or as a coach, we all have a use-by date. And it's best. Dennis was buried and this is also absolutely true, I came back one winter, Dennis died. He was devoted to the club, and Walter, the groundsman, was asked by Dennis's widow to scatter his ashes on our square. Unfortunately, on that particular day, it was quite windy. And in Derbyshire, it was particularly old-fashioned. The trouser cuffs come up to about your knees. And Walter arrived back in the secretary's office in a hell of a state, saying, "I've got half of Dennis Smith up in trouser legs." My first game for Derbyshire was in a 50-over affair at Uxbridge. We were playing a minor counties team. It was a knockout game, and so I was quite nervous. And the umpire was a fellow called Cess Pepper, who had been a very successful county cricketer. But he was an Aussie, but he played a lot of county cricket. I was at the non-strikers end for the first over of the match, and Cess was very cold. Playing in England in early April is very cold. Anyway, the game started. They were amateurs, we were meant to be, etc., etc. I was still nervous. My first game as a professional cricketer. And about the second or third ball, I think it was the third, there was quite a flatulent sound as the bowler delivered the ball. And I thought, good God, he's not that quick. And the same thing happened the next ball. At that stage, I'd worked out that it wasn't the bowler, it was actually the umpire. And on the sixth delivery, and this is true, they gradually got louder and increased in volume. Cess is down there, and this is, without a word of a lie, he looked up at me, he had a ruddy face because it was freezing cold, and he said, "Right," he said, "we've never met, but would you not mind kicking that one to the boundary?" And that was my introduction to professional cricket, and it became my life. So that's a little bit on the playing side. I suppose, I plodded along, and then after playing, which was Papatoetoe and whatnot, I sort of finished and concentrated on my corporate, or my transition. It's quite a big transition actually being in professional sports and going to do something else, particularly if you haven't found anything else you want to do. And I had the opportunity, I hadn't thought a lot about it, but I had the opportunity to work at Fletcher's, which I did for a couple of years, which is whilst I was playing here at Papatoetoe and in the corporate world. I worked there for a couple of years, and it was a great opportunity, and as it turned out, it helped me enormously in my coaching sort of exploits which followed. I wouldn't say I set the corporate world on fire, but I followed two senior managers around. John Wright was in charge of Fletcher building that sector at the stage, and I worked for Ken Howard and David Sexton, who ran Challenger Properties in Firth, and Winston Wallboards and Giroy and a few others. And I used to follow them around and go to all the strategic planning meetings. I did it for 9 months, and then I did a project on pallets and God knows what. I worked at Pacemakers North Shore for 3 months. I did every bloody job in that placemaker shop. It was damn difficult. I'll never forget being on the counter. That was most embarrassing because I had no idea what strap racing was, and I used to greet the carpenters by saying, "How can I hold you up this morning?" And one particular lady walked in and she wanted a posse screw. I had no idea what a posse screw was. And then you always get to say, "Don't I know you?" And you go, "Oh God, here we go." And she said, "Well, I would like a posse." I said, "No, Anyway, we were walking down the screw aisle and we were both in exactly the same position. I didn't have a bloody clue what a posse screw was. And she thought she knew me, but she didn't. Then she looked at me and she finally said, "Look, you John Wright the cricketer?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What are you doing here? You're running out of money." And that sort of thing's good for you, because it's sort of, you work out where you know, I always thought that I don't have a lot of time for sportsmen who couldn't drink in a public bar. And I think that that's one great thing about New Zealand sportsmen, particularly, is that they keep their feet on the ground. And that can be difficult because life as a coach sometimes, you spend half your time trying to keep their feet on the ground. It's an interesting world, particularly now that things can happen so quickly. But anyway, I got a call after a while, and I went coaching in Kent. I was back to Kent as a coach, which was really great actually, because it was just something that I felt very comfortable about. I got there in '97, and I walked across that wonderful ground at St Lawrence and Canterbury with the tracksuit on and swore I'd never wear a tie again in my life. And I spent four years coaching county cricket in Kent, which is probably what you need, because coaching is a little bit like captaincy, or any leadership position in management. It's just the fact of doing the job and understanding that you learn by your mistakes, and you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn basically who you are, what you stand for, and what works and what doesn't work. And that held me in huge, well, it gave me it was a great learning period for myself as a cricket coach. Because after the Kent situation of 4 years, I had an opportunity to work in India. And that for me was probably my most memorable experience of being the first foreign coach in India with the Indian team. It was a challenging time, but it wasn't expected to work. But India is very unique in terms of cricket, and everyone here that is from India will understand that situation. The interview to get that job, well, it went like this basically. I was coaching Kent, and I had Rahul Dravid, who was playing for India at the time, and Saurav was at Lancashire. And I was approached by the PCC to see whether I'd be interested in it. They said, yes, the interviews are in Chennai, and we want you to fly there. So they sent me a couple of business class tickets, one business class ticket, obviously, and I went for an interview in Chennai, and so I had to, I overnighted in Heathrow because I was down in Kent, the traffic's terrible on the M25. So I stayed there, and when I went to check in, I phoned Mr. Lele, who was the gentleman I was dealing with, and I said, do I need anything else? He said, no, you just get yourself to Chennai and you'll be right. Well, when I went to check in, what he conveniently forgot to tell me was that I needed a visa. So I was trying to explain to this very stubborn person at the checkout counter that I was actually going for a bloody big job, probably the biggest of my life. And that if I got to India, or when I got to India, a visa wouldn't be a worry, because India, you know, cricket, it might be, you know, it'll work out. Well, she wouldn't let me on the plane. So in the end I said, bugger you, I'll fly to Munich, because the flight was a Lufthansa flight and I went by Munich. So I got on the plane and I went to Munich. I ran with one man I knew in India, who I'd never met, who at the time was having a massage, the CCI, Raj Singh Gundapur. He said, John, you get to Munich and everything will be fine. So I got to Munich. Sure enough, I went to check in from Munich to Chennai. And of course, I had the same problem, except now it was in German, which was very, very difficult. The only thing I sort of came up with, I think Franz Beckenbauer saved my life, I don't know. But I mentioned him anyway. I was the last man on that business class flight to Chennai for the interview. And I got on that flight. I'll never forget getting on that flight. I was an absolute dripping mess. And I collapsed on my seat and I thought, well, anyway. So I got to Chennai at about midnight. I was met by a fellow called Murali, who was a local umpire, and we needed the money for the visa. But Burley wasn't a rich man, and I certainly didn't have any rupees straight from Kent. So somehow we got through customs and God knows what else, because those things can be quite complicated, can't they, Bruce, when you get to those airports? I mean, it's not straightforward, is it? There's no queues, and it just sort of works, but it's, you know. Anyway, we got to the hotel, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting on my bed and I'm having a restorative fag, looking at the telly. And the fellow that had been contacting me, who sent me the tickets, was being interviewed at 1 o'clock in the morning, or 12:30, it was very late. And I remember he was asked the question, and our interviews with, I was Greg Chappell myself the next day in that hotel, and he said, well, the interviewer said, well, is it correct that the BCCI are going to employ a foreign coach? And Mr. Lady said, no, they never do that. And I looked at my bed and I thought, God, what the hell am I doing here? And that's anyway, we fluked the job. So yeah, it was a fantastic part of my life, incredibly challenging. I don't know how I can relate it to you, but I think coaching is very like a lot of things. It's about leadership. And being yourself, and being able to communicate, but also teaching, and also empowering the people that you're working with. And I was incredibly lucky to have, as senior players in that Indian team, not only outstanding cricketers, but outstanding men. I hope this is interesting. Sachin Tendulkar was never, ever late once for practice. And that's a fact. And if he had something else to do, he would always let you know. And I suppose the thing that really, when you join the Indian cricket team, it's a bit like joining quite a popular band. First time that I went anywhere with Sachin, sort of publicly, was in, we were preparing to play Australia in 2001. We were having a camp in Chennai. So we finished our morning session, which used to start at 7, because it's very hot there, you have to start really early. And at about 11:30, we decided, Sachin said, you want to come to the Adidas shop with me, John? Well, it was Christmas time, I needed a few presents, so I thought, yes, I'd love to come to the Adidas shop with you, Sachin. And when we got to the Adidas shop, we just got out of a van, and it was sort of like the main street, and we went into the Adidas shop, we got what we needed, and then the person who was running the shop, the owner, wanted to have a cup of tea with Sachin, and the new Gora coach. Outside. But anyway, well, when we finished the cup of tea, the owner said, I think there's a problem. I said, well, what's the problem? Well, I counted the policemen outside the hotel, there were 27 cops. And there must have been a crowd of 3,000. And I accompanied Sachin to a couple of these stores. The next one was in Chandigarh, on the square there. Well, we couldn't get into the bloody shop there, we'd like to get out of it. And so it was very interesting. And then I had Dravid, who was hugely disciplined, incredibly disciplined. A person like Dravid never got out of the nets. Every time you train with the discipline, the self-discipline. That encapsulated and really tried to capture what he was trying to do in the game. Kumble, wise, hard-working, a particularly close friend. And Laxman, in between the two ages. We had a group of experienced players. And Suruv, who was the captain, who really didn't give a shit about what anyone thought of him, and was incredibly intelligent. And now he is president of the PCC, which is arguably the most powerful position in world cricket. He will do a good job. Yeah. So, what about Viru? Viru. Hugely, Virender Sehwag. Virender Sehwag comes from Delhi. Most of the Indian boys have coaches from being very young. Sachin had a coach that used to take him to practices on the back of his motorbike. He'd play 2 games. He'd play a game in the morning, wearing bat. Then the coach would put him on the back of the motorbike, and they'd go to another game, and he'd play that game. After that game, he would go to nets. And during that net session, the coach would put a rupee on off stump and said, if you don't get out, you can get to keep the rupee. And Sachin said to me, John, it was a really big deal for me to go home, not to get out, because I wanted to take that rupee home. And a lot of the boys, all of them, Viru included, who used to travel, his father was a greengrocer. There were two things I used to say to Viru: how's your mum's back? Because she had a bad back. And what are you going to do today? Watch the ball and play straight job. Very simple. Great man, great player. Has the second highest strike rate in Test history after Donald Bradman. Only player in India to have 2 triple centuries and out from the 290. Viru Sehwag is a very, very special talent. He scored 190 against Australia in the Boxing Day Test at Melbourne, and the wicket was doing a lot. He was out 2 overs before tea. Total brilliance. Anyway, I'm pottering along. I suppose you have to get lucky in your life. We were playing, the first series for me was against Zimbabwe. That was pretty easy. Then we played the 2001 series against Australia. They hadn't been beaten in 16 tests. And I've always enjoyed playing against Australia. I like the way they play cricket. They're tough, they're hard, and there's no compromise. And what you've got to understand about playing Australia is that it starts well before the game starts. And it's not about how you play. Well, playing against Australia is about the mentality. And if you don't have the right mentality, you will get absolutely decimated, which happened last year to our team. And our team is a good team. And if they have a lesson to learn, it will be going back with the attitude that when you go to Australia or when you're playing Australia, you have to dominate from the start, and not in the way that you train or whatever, but the way you think. There's only one way to look down at an Australian team in terms of cricket, and that's to look down. I think Mystery Morrison sums it up best. Remember Mystery played years and years ago. Mystery Morrison, great commentator. I don't know why they got rid of him. It's fantastic. Him and Glenn Turner were brilliant. Glenn was the greatest analysis. Glenn Turner, fantastic analyst of cricket. Probably too honest and direct for many, but fantastic. But anyway, Mystery always said, playing against Australia, he summed it up like this. At one time, Mystery Morrison was the Fernley representative in New Zealand. So he wanted a Fernley bat, or his Australasia actually, because he was close mates with Duncan Fernley in Worcester. So he wanted Fernley gear, you got it from Mystery Morrison, who was in Greytown. And he got an order from Australia for bats and pads and whatnot, but also for 24 boxes. But he couldn't work it out because the boxes were a lot bigger than normal boxes. And Mystery thought to himself, bloody arrogant Australians. So he got 2 boxes, the 24 boxes made up, much larger than normal. And he put made in New Zealand, small means. And that, in many ways, is how you play Australia. You have to. It all starts, there's a lot of gamesmanship, but it starts with the attitude that they play real tough, uncompromising cricket, particularly in their own country, but anywhere you play, and they like to dominate from the time they're in the hotel, to the time they get on the bus, to the time they get off the bus. How do you warm up? For instance, it might seem silly. I grew up in a New Zealand team where we used to warm up and look across at those big Australian jerseys. In 80, 81, Edgar, Wright, 6 or 7 tests, Chappell, Lilly, Thompson, Marsh. You're looking at them. The bloody hoops on their jerseys seem about that wide, wider. And that enters your sight. And so even the smallest detail, if you're warming up against Australia, for me, I don't want my team facing that lot. I don't want them to see it, because we're doing our own thing. And you've got to have that mentality. I once gave a team talk to the Indian boys. They thought I'd gone nuts. I stood on a chair. I couldn't hear, but I might fall off it. Actually, some of you might I stand on the chair and shut up. But you look down on them, and it's a mentality that you've got to understand that you're in a fight to the death. And Australians, if you can get their cricket team in a position where they're under pressure, they will react like any other cricket team. They will follow. All games have momentum. And the critical part in any game is to get the opposition under pressure. And when you do that, you keep doing that, and you keep over and over again, and you never take it off. So that was a big thing for us in 2001 when we beat Australia. I will finish by telling you a little bit. Do you want me to go on? Because I've got options. For the last 7 years, I mean, I had a spell with New Zealand, which was ordinary, at best, I suppose, for many reasons. But for the last 7 years, I worked with the IPL for the Mumbai Indians. Yeah, come on, Mumbai. We're going to win it again. We've won 4 out of the last 7, you know. Did you know that? Yeah. Yeah, we're going to win it this year. No, I went up there with Anil Kumble in 2013 and had the opportunity to go back and coach for IPL. And IPL is really interesting. IPL is a business. BCCI are very good at businesses, the business of cricket. They established a business model where they started with they auctioned off the 8 teams. They raised just under $1 billion. They sold the TV rights for around about $1 billion. So very quickly, they had a $2 billion business. And they protect that. And they understand fundamentally that it's about the television rights and also protecting players, Indian players' ability to play. There's no Indian player that plays in any other T20 competition in the world. And the reason for that is that they're protecting their property, which is the IPL. It's not the same issue without crowds, but they understand that getting on television and how they market it is very important. The people that own the company that I work for are the Reliance Group. They're a significant group. They're responsible for 40% of the GDP of India. They're the single biggest. They have the single biggest oil refinery site in the world. And you could go on and on. My boss is 28. I used to work with Nita Ambani when I was coaching. I coached them for 2 years. They said to me at the end of the 2 years, "John, you're too old." Because for us, not only winning, we won their first title in Middle, and I only won the Champions Trophy, and the second year was a little bit slow. They said, "You're too old," because it's important to our team, not only winning, but how our hits go on social media. How many times we register across the various social media platforms, because they're building a brand, and they understand that. So we had Ricky Ponting. Ricky took over for 2 years. Now we have Mahela Jayawardene. Shane Bond's our bowling coach. Jimmy Pammons from XND, he's our fielding coach. We're very well resourced, but it's about building a brand, and they're passionate, our owners. I worked for Mrs. Ambani for 2 years, and now her son, Akash, is the person I report to. They're passionate about it. And the reason that we're successful is that we're very well resourced because of our owners and who they are. And every individual IPL franchise is different, and in some ways reflects the not only the owners' characteristics, but also perhaps their business. For instance, KKR owned by Shuruk Khan, who's the biggest movie star in the world. Chennai, Stephen Fleming's been extraordinarily successful. They had a tough year, but they're owned by the ex-treasurer who owns a cement company. Srinivasan, yeah, and he's a formidable man. So they're all different, but they've been great to work for because they're tough, they're demanding, and they treat it as a business. And the role after coaching, really basically for me, is 3 months up there scouting. Unfortunately with COVID, this may all change, but I spent 3 months looking at players with a group of 5 or 6 of us. There are 36 now, because they've changed, 36 or 37 first class teams in India. So we scout all those players, all of them. And Once we've done that over the 50 over competition, which takes about a month, and then there's a T20 competition, that'll take another month. And then we'll get about 80 players. We'll have 2 camps. There'll be 80 players and then another 80. We'll fly them. We have our own ground, our own facility, which is where 60 or 80,000 Reliance people live. And we'll work out who we are interested in buying for the next round, because every year there's an auction, so you can change the dynamics of your team. And for instance, the budget is 12.5 million. We know that we're going to spend between 6 and 7 million on our top 5 or 6 Indian players. Currently we have Rohit Sharma, who's our captain, he's 2 million. Hardik Pandya is about 1.7 million. Boom is 1.2 million. Kunal Pandya, Hardik's brother, he's about 800,000 we paid him. And we've got a kid called Rashan Kishan, we paid 600, and another guy called Surya. So they take up about 60 to 70% of our budget of that 12.5 million. And we're probably going to have to replace 1 or 2 of them, because every 3 years you can only keep 4. So you constantly have to rejig your team. And then we'll spend another 4 to 5 million, depending on how much we spend on that first group, on our overseas players. And there's 8 of them. And then we need a balance of an Indian bench, and that's where the scouting comes in, because we buy another 10 for about 1.5 million. And it's important to get those kids right. For instance, we signed Boomer for £10,000, and now we've got 10,000 well, rupees really. Now we're paying them 10,000 bucks, basically, think of the bucks, we're paying them well over $1 million. We signed Hardik for 10,000, we're paying them $1.5 million. That's happened in 3 years. And the same will happen, because the real demand for players are very, very good Indian players. And so it's a little bit of a business. Then you have an auction. So we identify the young players we want, and then we go to an auction. And the auction is every year, but every 3 years is a big auction. And we'll practice that auction. We'll practice that auction for a week. We get a list of players. There's about 500 or 600 of them. It takes about 4 or 5 hours to go through every list. And we'll each take turns at buying for different teams. And when the spotlight's really on you, you have to buy for the Mumbai Indians team. And all that information will be put together, so we get an average price of what we expect our players that we want are going to reach in that auction. And also we have a list. We have a number 1 pick, we have a number 2 pick, so say buying a leg spinner or a fast bowler, Indian fast bowler, we're talking Indian players here. We might be one leg spinner, we might want a batsman. So we'll have our first choice, our second choice, our third choice, our fourth choice. Because we might miss choice number 1 because he may go too high in the auction. And those are the things. So it's all about planning. And currently, the last thing I had to do, and maybe the last thing because of COVID, is that I had to pick our team for 2 years out. So we know basically who we want to keep even for this continent, and who we are looking to, what our team will look like in 2 years' time. So that's about it. I'll finish. It's great to be back. Thank you for being very a generous and well-mannered audience. There's been no food flying in my direction. It's lovely to come back. I suppose, you know, I've been very fortunate. I'm very proud to play here. I enjoy the people here. I think this is a real blue-collar club, if that's the right description. Great people, down to earth, play it for the right reasons. I really love my time here. I wished I could have scored more runs. But I wasn't good enough. All the excuses, I've heard them all before. Oh, the person behind the sight screen moved, coach. Oh my God, please. I didn't sleep well last night, the dog barked. So, yeah. I suppose the only thing I will finish was, you do have these thrills. There is one thrill that does always stay in my mind though, and that's playing for your country. And I think it's a privilege to play for your country. It all starts at club level and secondary school level. And I hope that, I hope this COVID actually acts as a little bit of a check for a lot of sporting organisations to understand that professional sport is important. I think the players need to be very well paid. In fact, as much as they can be afforded. But also, I think it's really important if you're running sport that you've got to understand where it all starts. And for me, the things that have to be resourced, it's like a tree. You've got to feed the roots. So you've got to look at how much resource you're putting into growing the game, which always starts at primary, secondary school level, and then resourcing the club level, because that's extremely important. And I think if any sport wants to sustain its improvement and keep playing, they want a great top team. We've got that in New Zealand. This New Zealand team is a fantastic little side. They are loved in India. They played brilliantly in the World Cup. They had full of good people, particularly well led by Kane Williamson, who was respected not only as a cricketer but as a person. So we've got that. But the next thing, the next challenge is to actually start resourcing what's happening in the secondary schools, the primary schools, and also at the club level, because more than anything, that's where it really comes from. That's where your true love comes from. And to be any good, you've got to be playing. And I love playing my first test for New Zealand, because I can remember it. It took me 56 minutes to get off the mark. It was off the inside edge, onto the thigh pad, down to square leg, and I nicked the first ball I faced in Test cricket, and I always send that umpire a Christmas card. It was wonderful. Jumbo Anderson was the other end. We'd stayed at the George Hotel on Willis Street. Jumbo threw fruit out at the Friday night shoppers. We went this hole, we got lost to the basin. We lost the toss. We got put into bat, it was blowing howling gale, and I sat at one end as Willis. After the first over, we were 9 without loss. He bowled me 2 bounces that both went for 4 byes, and an oval. It was the fastest start I was ever involved in. I was on Raw for 50 minutes, and Jumbo was on 28. He kept walking down and said, shaking, he said, "You're doing bloody great." And I said, "Jumbo, I want to bloody go at your end, please." Anyway, by lunch, I'd raced to 23. And as I walked off, I thought, well, I've been practicing autograph for about, since I was a bloody kid, since I was riding. I was practicing autograph, and I thought, well, here's a chance. I'm not out first test, not out at lunch. Great. And this kid put this thing in front. I went to sign it, he pulled it away. And he looked at me and said, "Right, you're a boring bastard." He said, "If you'd been playing in front of my front room, I'd have pulled the curtains." So, thank you. I think that's all I'm going to say, because we've got to get the song on the way.